So, do we pay too much for new comic books? The ones you buy at your LCS? I think a lot of people would just say yes without even thinking about it. They would just say, absolutely, we pay too much. They're too expensive. But that's a knee jerk reaction. You're going to say that about just about anything. When somebody says, is this too expensive? You're probably going to say yes. I don't think that way. I like to look at the data. I like to go back and check the research. In this case, my gut reaction is, yeah, they're kind of expensive. There's no question about it. But are they too expensive? I didn't know. So I went back and I looked at the historical cost of comics in comparison to minimum wage. And if you want to take that journey with me, keep watching. So I went back to 1938. 1938. Why did I pick that? Was it because that's the year that Superman was first released? No, not really. The average comic book in 1938 was about 64 pages, it cost 10 cents. But that's not why I picked 1938. I picked 1938 because that was the year that the federal minimum wage law went into effect. And the federal minimum wage for 1938 was 25 cents an hour. And that meant you could buy 2 comic books for 1 hour's work. 2 64-page comic books for 1 hour's work. Average pay cost 1.6 tenths of a cent. Now, why is that important? Flash forward to 1944, that's when we got the first minimum wage increase from 25 cents an hour to 30 cents an hour. And sometime in the 40s, I don't know exactly when, didn't do that much research, comic books went from 64 to 48 pages. So we're just going to arbitrarily say that was around 1944 as well. And that means even though comic books still cost 10 cents, and you could now buy 3 of them, the actual per page cost went up. The per page cost was now 2.1 tenths of a cent. So for a 64-page comic, for 64 pages, you're looking at 13 cents, the equivalent of 13 cents if it was still a 64-page comic. So even though the price didn't go up, the value decreased because the page count decreased. So comics were actually more expensive, but they were the same price. And if that confused you, I'm not surprised. It confuses a lot of people. Even confuses me a little bit, and I did the math. So in 1945, we had a second minimum wage increase, and you could now buy 4 comics for 1 hour's wage. The wage went to 40 cents an hour. Price of comics was still 10 cents, was still averaged out to 13 cents when you figured it by page. And how many pages did you get when you bought 4 comics? 192 compared to 128 that you were able to buy for 1 hour's work in 1938. But it was more expensive in the long run. whereas it cost you 20 cents to buy 2 comics in night and get 128 pages in 1938. It now costs you 26 cents, well, no, about 20 cents to buy 64 pages, or to get, excuse me, to get 128 pages, you'd have to spend about 35 cents. That's math off the top of my head, and it probably is wrong. Then in 1950, the price of comics increased again. They were still 10 cents. And I'm saying 1950, but it could have been a little bit before, it could have been a little bit after. But I've noticed almost every comic published after 1950, with the exception of the Dells and the, we're talking basically DC right here. And pretty much every DC comic after 1950 was 32 pages. So the effective cost per page was now 3.1 tenths of a cent. Almost double what it was in 1938. But you could buy 7 comic books because the minimum wage went up to 75 cents an hour. You could buy 7 comic books for an hour's wage. Imagine that. It's just awesome. The effective price for 64 pages was 20 cents. In 1955, the minimum wage went up to $1. Comics were still 10 cents. You could buy 10 comic books for an hour's wage. Still, the effective price for 64 pages was 20 cents. In 1961, the minimum wage went up to $1.15. Comics were still 10 cents, so you could buy 11 comics now for an hour's wage. Effective page cost was the same. 3.1 tenths of a cent. 1962 broke my heart. I got 25 cents a week allowance. In 1962, comic books went from 10 cents to 12 cents. I went from being able to buy 2 comic books and this brand new drink called a Slurpee for a nickel to buying 2 comic books. No Slurpee for me. But that's not a bad thing. That's just personal. That has nothing to do. You could get 11 comic books for an hour's wage. In 1962, you could only buy 9 comics because the price went to 12 cents. The effective page cost was now 3.8 tenths of a penny. And it cost you 24 cents to get 64 pages that you could get for 10 cents back in 1938. Of course, the minimum wage has increased quite a bit since then. And your average cost for a comic was really low at that point. In 1963, the minimum wage went to $1.25. And we could once again buy 10 comic books. In 1968, the minimum wage went to $1.60 an hour. 12-cent comics. You could now buy 13 12-cent comics. That was truly, even though it's called the Silver Age, or towards the end of the Silver Age, to me, that was truly a golden age for comics. Because you could buy 13 comics for 1 hour's work. Of course, they were only 32 pages, but, what can you do? In 1969, comic books went up to 15 cents. 1.5 times the cost of the 1950 comics. It dropped down to 10 comic books per hour, and the effective page cost was 4.7 tenths of a cent. 30 cents cost you 30 cents to get 24 page or to get 64 pages. In 1971, DC raised their price to 25 cents, but you got 52 pages. Sounds like a great deal. Sounds like you're actually getting a good deal. The effective cost per page, 4.8 cents per page. "64 pages of comics would cost you 31 cents. That's just to put it in perspective as to the original 1938 64 pages. In 1972, DC went down to 20 cents. Marvel went up to 20 cents. Basically, comics were right around 20 cents. Minimum wage was still $1.60. You could buy 8 comics. 64 pages cost you about 40 cents. And the effective per page cost was 6.3 tenths of a penny. And it would remain that until 1976. But minimum wage in 1975 went to $2, and you could now again buy 10 comics. And in 1976, it went to $2.30, and you could once again buy 11 comics for $1, or for one hour's work. 1977, comics went up to 30 cents. This was the highest price jack up to that point. It went up by a third. You could only buy 7 comics, and the per page cost 9.4 tenths of a cent. It went from 6.3 to 9.4 tenths of a cent. If you wanted 60 pages, 64 pages, it cost you 60 cents. In 1979, minimum wage went to $2.90 an hour. Comics went up to 40 cents. I skipped 1978, which increased the comic cost to 35 cents. But in 1979, you were now paying 1.25 cents per page. And if you wanted 64 pages, it was going to cost you 80 cents. In 1981, our minimum wage went to $3.35. Comic industry responded by increasing the price to 50 cents. Now you were down to 6 comics per hour at a cost of 1.56 cents per page. In 1982, they raised the price again to 60 cents. We were now down to 5 comics for an hour of work, and an increased page cost of 1.88 cents per page. In 1984, they raised the price again to 75 cents, a 15-cent price hike. Now we could only buy 4 comics for an hour's wage. Back to 1945, basically. And the per page cost? A little over a penny and a half per page. In 1990, we were still getting $3.35 an hour. Comics were $1. You could only buy 3 comics for 1 hour's work. You could only get, and the page costs 3.13 cents. It cost you $2 to get 64 pages. 1991, we got a bit of a bailout from the federal government. We ended up with a $4.25 minimum wage. We were back up to buying 4 comics per hour. They were still cost you $2 to get 64 pages, though. In 1992, comic industry responded. $1.25 for a comic book. DC and Marvel. Now, these are not the special comic books. These are the newsstand comics, which were generally a little cheaper than the direct market because they would do something special with direct market. So you're looking at 3 comics for an hour's wage. No, 1991, we were looking at 4 comics for an hour's wage. 1992, $1.25, 3 comics for $1 wage. Cost of the comics, 3.91 cents per page. In 1994, we're still only getting $4.25 an hour. Comics go up to $1.50. We're paying 4.69 cents per page and can only buy 2 comics for an hour's wage. So basically 1938 all over again. And that's not a problem because that's about where comics should be, in my opinion. You should be able to work for an hour, buy 2 comic books, maybe have a little bit left over to get a snack. If snacks weren't so damn expensive. We stayed at $4.25 an hour through 1996. Comic books by that time were up to $1.99. We can still get 2. In 1997, the minimum wage went to $5.15. Comic books were $1.99. We could still buy 2 of them. Let's skip forward to 2006. We're getting $5.15 an hour. Comic books go to $2.99. For the first time since the beginning of the minimum wage in 1938, you can only buy 1 comic book for an hour's wage. The effective price per page, 9.34 cents. You want 64 pages? You pay $5.98. 2007, the minimum wage went up 70 cents, $5.85 an hour. No help. You could still only buy 1 comic. In 2008, minimum wage went to $6.55. Once again, you could buy 2 comic books because comics were $2.99 for an hour's wage. Cost was still 9.34 cents per page. In 2018, we got our next wage increase. But in the meantime, in 2010, they upped the price of comics to $3.99, dropping the number we could buy back to 1. If you wanted 64 pages, it was going to cost you $7.98. The effective cost of per page, 12.47 cents. Now let's go to 2018 when we're getting $7.25 minimum wage, which remains to this day. You can still only buy 1 comic. If you wanted 2, it's still going to cost you $7.98. Let's look at today. Minimum wage is still $7.25. That's the federal minimum wage. Comics, $4.99. Average price. Some are more expensive, some are less expensive. You can only buy one comic for an hour's wage. If you want to buy two comics, you got to work an hour and a half. Price of a comic per page, 15.59 cents per page. I think my conclusion to all of this, I think if you want to buy a comic book, it shouldn't cost you an hour and a half's work. Comic books, you should be able to buy two comics for an hour's work. If they dropped the price back to $2.99, they would probably sell more comics. Spawn is probably one of the best-selling comic books out there. It's $1.99. If Todd McFarlane can afford to sell his Spawn comic for $1.99 and make money on it, what's the deal with these other companies? I'll tell you what the deal is. They raise the price. They don't sell as many comics. How do they deal with it? They raise the price. So they sell even less comics. So how do they deal with it? They raise the price. Right now, a young teen getting his first job at minimum wage who collects comic books can't buy a whole lot. Buy one or two, maybe. Because he also has other things to pay for. Maybe he's got a car. Maybe he has a car payment. Maybe he has to put gas in that car. Maybe he wants to buy shoes or clothes or maybe a snack once in a while. Maybe he has to buy his lunch every day. And he doesn't have hardly any money left over for comics. Why? Because in comparison to our minimum wage, comics are too expensive. I believe comics should not cost you an hour and a half's wage. New comics, they're just too damn expensive. That's all there is to it. And I'm not saying that as a knee-jerk reaction. I just went over with you historically. The best we ever had was in 1968 when you could buy 13 comics for an hour's wage. I'm not thinking we should go back to that. It'd be nice. But at least let's go back to 1938 where we could get two comics for a 1 hour's minimum wage work. And that's how I feel about it. Now, thinking about comic books, remember, if you are a collector and you handle your comics and they're not in sleeves or you don't have them slabbed, and even if you do have them slabbed, wash your hands before you handle them. It's good for the comics. It's good for your slabs. It's good for the sleeves that you keep them in. The less dirt you get on that stuff, the better. The less oils from your hands you get on it, the better. So wash your hands. It's good for your comics. It's good for your collection. It's good for your health. And we'll see you next video. Bye.